pleasure of Dr. Andrew Chung will be giving us a temple tidbit.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Andrew.
Morning, everyone. Long time no see. I haven't, we've been doing some outdoor services, and so I'm happy to be back on Zoom to share some temple tidbits with you guys. So today's topic is, I believe many of you will find it quite interesting and a bit shocking. Considering the world events that are going on, I believe our health message is becoming, as Robert brought forth, is becoming more crucial. And so let's take a look at some things together. Many of you might remember, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Many of you may remember this in Flint, Michigan, where the officials told the people nothing to worry about, the water is fine. And how Flint poisoned its people is what this article says. And so basically there was high levels of lead and different toxins in the water. And the people were bringing that up to the officials that the water seemed to be contaminated as brown. And they said, oh, don't worry, it's all good. You can even drink it. And many of the individuals in that town were contaminated. And we hear these stories and we really are touched at the heart. Because like, I can't believe they would do something so horrible to those people. It's really appalling. But if you consider it, many of us have been exposed to some things, and what I'm going to bring forth, you're going to find quite shocking. It's called persistent organic pollutants. And so what does that really mean? Well, let's break that down. I'm gonna abbreviate it POPs instead of saying the full word every single time. So what are POPs? Number one, it's something that's persistent, meaning these are definitions from the Oxford Languages Dictionary. It says continuing to exist or endure over a prolonged period. So that's what persistent means. Organic means relating to living matter. Pollutants is a substance that pollutes or contaminates something. And so if you put that together, what a POP is, it's a substance that pollutes living organisms and is not easily degradable. And so it's not easy to get rid of once it's contaminated a living organism. And obviously we are living organisms. There are many living organisms. Even plants are living organisms. And so what is this that's polluting living organisms? First of all, I want to go into where do POPs come from? That's going to answer that question. Number one, it comes from pesticides. Pesticides are considered persistent organic pollutants. The reason it's important for them to persist is because you want it to keep protecting the plants when you use pesticides, and that's why they create them in a way that it's going to stick to that plant for a long period of time. And so those are organochloro, OCPs and DDTs. I'm going to use abbreviations because half the words are about 15, 20 letters. And so OCPs and DDTs, so pesticides is one source, industrial and technical chemicals, so PCBs, PPDEs, PFOSs. And then the third source, and so from industry, that's where that's generated and it enters into our ecosystem. And then industrial byproducts, these are things that you weren't intending to create, but it was a byproduct of the things that you were creating. And so this is the sources of these POPs. And so let's get into how did I get exposed to the POPs? Because I'm letting you know, all of us have been exposed to POPs in some form or fashion. And so for the human organism, 90% of exposure, this is from a journal article, it says over 90% of human exposure to POPs is through the consumption of contaminated food, particularly foods of animal origin. So it makes you wonder, like, why would it be particularly foods of animal origin? Well, if you look at it on that second bar, it says POPs can bioaccumulate in the fatty tissue of living organisms and therefore become concentrated as they move through the food chain. So you guys know what the food chain is. It starts off with the plant at the bottom, and then the plant gets eaten by bugs and by animals. And then those animals, which are herbivorous animals, they get eaten by carnivorous animals. And so you see it's concentrated as it moves along the food chain. And so those at the top of the food chain, end up having the highest levels because they're consuming it and getting the concentrated levels in those that are lower on the food chain. So the lowest levels are going to be at the lowest end of the food chain. The highest levels are going to be on the highest end of the food chain. And so how does that make sense? How does that relate to us? We're going to see. That's an important concept to remember. Higher on the food chain, more exposure to POPs. Well, what foods have it? Egg, dairy products, meat and meat products, grain, flour, bran, rice, fruit, vegetables, honey, oil, fish, mussel, oyster, water. It's like, oh my goodness, if I just exclude all these things from my diet, guess what? I would starve to death. So, how do we move with this information? Well, I want you to look in the center section. We see that the vegetable based products have the shortest list. The reason for that is because they tend to have the lowest amount of these POPs, whereas those that were from animal origin tend to have the highest list. So let's look at this. Let's dig a little further. What is so bad about POPs? If I'm getting exposed to it, why would I work to minimize my exposure to POPs or persistent organic pollutants? Well, we found through studies exposure to these pollutants, I'm reading in the blue, may cause various health problems. Do we have health problems in the United States? We have an abundance of health problems, and it's only a growing, a worsening problem each day. But some of these health problems are endocrine disruption, cardiovascular disease, which is our number one killer in the nation, cancers, which is our number 2 or 3, it kind of flips the list every once in a while, diabetes, birth defects, and a dysfunctional immune and reproductive system. So anybody want a dysfunctional immune system or one that's not functioning properly in the middle of a COVID crisis? No. Or crisis where any pestilence is running rampant? I know I don't want to sign up on that list. I want to make sure my system is maximized, it's working at its best. And so these are chemicals that can alter our immune system and cause some of our most common killers in the nation. So let's think about this. What are you trying to say, Andrew? Stop eating? No. But I'm going to tell you what the foods that have the highest levels of POPs and foods that you absolutely want to avoid. What do you guys think is the number one food? Any guesses?
Fish.
Fish. Yeah, fish, right.
Oyster.
Wow, you guys are some good students.
Meat.
Meat, okay. Because remember, we said it's go higher on the food chain and you'll get to the ones that have the highest levels. Number one is fish. Think about it. You dump some pollutants into the ocean, which is like industrial chemicals. The fish are going to eat the plants that absorbed it. And all of a sudden, the fish are going to bioaccumulate it and have plenty of persistent organic pollutants. Wild or farmed? Well, it really depends on which pollutant you're talking about. The wild will have a whole different series compared to the farmed. Farmed has 5 to 10 times more PCBs than the wild caught. So either way you go, you're going to get very high concentrations. The other thing is fish is very high in fats, so it tends to accumulate even more in the fish. Salmon being actually the worst. And so the rumor that fish is healthy for you is just a rumor. And I know Jesus ate fish, but he definitely didn't have any POPs in his fish. Let's go to number 2, meats. So poultry, beef, pork, and really all of those have high levels. Naturally, because they're going to eat the grass, it's going to accumulate in the fat tissue of those animals. And essentially, when you eat the animal, you're eating a concentrated version of the POPs. Number 3, what those animals release. So cheese, cow's milk, any type of milk from animals, you're going to get high concentrations because it's in the fat of that particular food substance. And so it all makes sense why our health message is the way it is. It was said to be a progressive health message, meaning we have to constantly grow in knowledge of what's being done to our food and make adjustments that are needed. So God doesn't do things simply to restrict us, but because he loves us. So the verse of the day I want to leave you guys with is, and I have told you before it comes to pass, that when it is come to pass, you might believe. John 14:29. You see, God gave us the gift of prophecy through the spirit of prophecy and the counsels we received in order to have us prepared for those moments where the enemy is going to be trying to attack our health. So I encourage you guys to stay in good health and to trust in God because he really does know what's best. Have a blessed Sabbath.
Amen.
Amen.